Welcome to the Dive Table. I'm Jay Gardner, and with me is Mr. Ben Bos, back again for our second episode together, coming all the way from sunny Denmark. No, from Denmark is Ben. Ben, how are you doing today?
Good. Dude, anything but sunny. I mean, the summer has definitely gone here. It's windy, rainy, cold as a refrigerator. It's starting to get miserable. It's time to book a flight to your side of the pond, I think.
Yeah, come stay with us for another couple weeks and
Oh, good Lord, yeah.
enjoy that. So, when was the last time you took a non-scuba training? Like, whatever it was. What was the last thing you had to learn from somebody
Oh,
non-scuba?
a non scuba thing. Well, as a part, as like a course or
Whatever, something you had to learn from somebody.
yeah. Well, actually, not that long ago, I took a skills session in swimming, in freestyle swimming.
Nice. And how did it go?
Well, great, because it's so nice to be on the other side, and when you're teaching a lot in your life, and you're I'm going to as far as to say, as by now after they've done this for 24 years professionally, it's becoming not what you do, it's becoming what you are.
Mm,
And turning it around and putting yourself in the student's place is so refreshing, because in that case it was very close to what we do, because this guy is filming me in the swimming pool and giving me technique things. It was like hearing me talk about someone that needs to learn how to use his fins, and you would think that I'd have a grasp on how it works to move through water, but damn, you use your hands instead of your feet, and everything changes. The whole thing changes. So that was eye-opening. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, the last time, unfortunately for me, that was recent, I had to take some compliance training, and it was all virtual compliance training. Oh my gosh, it was just like pulling your hair out. You know,
Yeah.
they kind of treat you like you're a 3-year-old, like you can't even read. So they're gonna voice over everything and
Mm,
make it so explicit. And then there's like a 40-question quiz that all
yeah.
of them are, so, there's some variance in what the answer could be, and they just go for it. So yeah, and that kind of sets up today because we're talking about training, which would be kind of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
So we were talking when you were here, and we thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun? We both have spent a lot of time of our life designing training, quote unquote, but really transformation. Shifting the way that people
Yeah.
behave and think about things for adults, right? For people that are well adults, right? We
Mm,
in your scuba, you're doing people that are certified divers or certifying divers, definitely adults, no longer kids. For me, I don't know if a lot of the podcast world knows this for me, but I do a lot of work in the innovation side. So training people who have their MBAs and all these sorts of things in big businesses, how to behave differently, how to not act like a big company, but act like a startup, scrappy and learn first and be okay with failure. It's a total mindset shift for a lot of that. And
yeah.
so we thought it'd be fun to do a cool podcast on that. So you looking at, are you ready to jump into this one?
Yeah, definitely. Because we were, I remember we were talking back and forth, like, hey, we should do the other episodes, and what should we talk about? And then I think all of a sudden in the car, it just came to us like, hey, let's. It was the most obvious choice to just talk about actually what we're doing here, designing scuba education. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's like, hey, eliciting a different behavior, because that's kind of the essence of why we are a bit different in the way we teach, I guess, within UTD. It's not a simple list of check marks to be ticked off on a slate, or a bunch of standards that just need to be fulfilled, and that's it. We're really looking at behavior of people, but now in a different environment. We kind of, without getting ahead of ourselves, but we kind of look at, okay, you as a person want to experience the underwater world. Great. let's first and foremost start to see how you as a person will behave underwater as a
Hmm.
physical being. So yeah, the motory aspect of that on the entry level classes at least are extremely heavy, and I think um, underplayed or underestimated, how you say,
Emphasized.
underemphasized in certain, like when I look at myself, like the way I used to teach um, in the early days, for sure. So yeah.
All right, well, let's get into this one. So I guess to set everything up, the first thing is, how do you approach designing training for adults? So to kind of set it up in a little bit more context, I think what we're talking about in the intro there, what we're trying to do is look at, okay, there's a problem to be solved, or whatever that would be, a desired outcome from a student. They start from that perspective.
Hmm.
And if we take something like, let's say Tech 1, for example,
Yeah.
they're a diver. The problem to be solved is they want to extend the depth that they go to, right? And they want to have that tech card so they could buy helium, right? That's the kind of problem that they're coming in at. And then there's this outcome. There's this other side that says, okay, they have their skills, tools, to be able to then do that, right?
Yeah.
And in between that, those two ends, the desire and the problem, and the outcome or the resolution of that, something has to be there. And that's the training, right? That's, okay, I'm going to go take a course. And behind the scenes there, for a lot of you that have never designed courses or been involved in that, is a lot of thought of, okay, how would that course go? What are the things that need to happen, so on and so forth, to
Hmm.
produce this outcome from this state? So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you approach, the design of something to solve the problem to produce the outcome when you're thinking about, Tech 1 or open water
Yeah.
or whatever it is? Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention before we jump too far into this, if you don't know, I probably should have set you up a little bit better here, Ben. Ben is the training director for UTD, Unified Team Diving, has designed tons of courses over the course of his career. And so when he's speaking on these things, this is coming from his experience and in being successful as an agency in producing those outcomes. So just wanted to set that up because I forgot to mention that in the beginning. Not everyone knows you as well as I do.
No, that's true. We kind of know each other, and then we just skipped over it. But I think these podcasts, on that note, when we're talking in this casual way, uh, I think there's an organic flow to them, so to speak. So, yeah, that was the intro. So,
There you go. It's like, all right, go for it. So how do you approach this in between space of, okay, I need to design something
yeah,
to solve this problem?
exactly. So the materials we put out there are twofold, right? They're learning materials, they're educational materials for the user, but they're tools and work tools for the instructors that use them out there. So they're twofold, and that poses its own set of challenges when it comes to building out the curriculum for a set class, let's say a tech class. So when we start to look at the user, the student, or the potential student, um, what I always think about is there has to be some kind of an alignment of expectation. Like you set it up perfectly. Like, okay, they come in with a certain need to solve a problem, and be that in their mind getting a certification card so that they can safely do these dives from a liability point of view. Okay, if they're doing these dives to certain depths, technical range, in that jargon, the insurance company might require a certain level of certification before they can actually do these things. But also gas fills, like you need to show a certain level of certification. So there's a practical aspect of that. Hey, in order for me to rent this car, I need to present my driver's license. Great.
Mm-hmm.
I need to go get my driver's license because I want to rent this car. That's a very pragmatic view to it. And obviously that is a big part of it, for sure. But scuba diving is also very unregulated. Because I always feel, how you say, surprised almost, but proud. It's like if someone asks me, hey, can I see your certification card? And it's very rare, right? I mean, how often do you actually hear that question? Which is strange, though, because people spend a lot of time and effort and money in getting that card, and then it never gets asked, let alone the logbook or, something like that. So when you look at the pragmatic part of it, it's easy, basically, because, okay, great. If someone wants to use this in a pragmatic form, they need to learn certain theory. They need to know how to handle certain pieces of equipment from a practical point of view. And that's it. There you go. Off you go. Because all the other stuff is kind of hard to measure, right? I can measure your knowledge on theory. Like, okay, great. Gas filling. What gases are you allowed to dive with? It's a very simple wrong or correct answer.
Right.
All that sort of stuff is measurable. So that's super easy to build into a class. I'll just make a presentation. In that presentation, you will get some facts and figures. You learn them, you do a little quiz, and you can test yourself. At the end, you do a little exam, and you get the outcome, and you've passed because you made not enough mistakes to not pass, and then you get the card. Great, perfect. That's all fine. But what I think is interesting within the scuba industry, especially as well in the higher classes, is the latent desire that people have. And in that, I mean the desire or the problem they're having, but they're not aware of the problem that they're having. And way back when, I come from a marketing background. I used to sell everything. I've sold everything except houses and boats. I think that everything else I've sold, probably, sofas, stereos, cars, copy machines, coffee, you name it, whatever, everything, paper, everything in between. So I come from a marketing background and did a lot of courses there with regards to sales and sales technique. And a lot of things wound back to what people say they want might not be the actual thing they need. They just don't know they need that more than the thing they express that they want.
Right.
You still with me?
Yep.
So, and I think that's the key, because if you tell me, hey, I need a green pair of pants, and I tell you, I can just see, okay, green is not your color, buddy. but hey, geez, you asked me for green pair of pants. If I just come propping up to you with a blue pair of pants, you try these on. Hello, I asked you for a green pair of pants.
Right.
There's no connection. The alignment of expectation is not met. It's like, okay, this guy clearly didn't hear what I was saying, except I did hear what you were saying, but I took it 3 steps further than you were ready to be. So I could have gone down the path and say, you know what, green would be great, but blue would actually match your shirt better or your eyes better, whatever, go down that path. Somehow to build a bridge between your expectation and my knowledge to meet, wait a minute, I never thought of it that way. Maybe I do need blue pants instead of green pants.
Right.
What kind of blue pants do you have? And all of a sudden they're into the blue pants, but you have to set it up, right? It's like, and I've done this a million times. I've come back to scuba diving in the technical range with regards to reaching your valves on a pair of doubles, right? It's one of these pillar skills that technical divers need to grasp, a bit like the back kick, all that sort of stuff, right? These very existential, pillar-y milestone things that they can do or can't do. And if they come up to me, it's like, hey, can you help me reach my valves? Sure, let's work on your modified frog kick. And sometimes I would just throw it out there, just throw them off a little bit, because to see what they would do, how they would react, right? And most of the time, it's like, what? No, valves on the other end of my body, not my fins, Dude, open your ears.
Right.
But when you then dig into it and when you start taking them down the the path of, okay, let's look at this from a teacher's point of view that slowly feeds the student with bits of information so that they end up being able to make their own conclusions. That's when you have good education. So we'll come back to that later. But so when you then explain to them that, okay, wait a minute, why are you unable to reach your valves? Well, a big cause could be that the set of your back that's laying on your back is further down. As soon as you reach behind you, it's very normal and very intuitive thing to scrouch forward and maybe come out of trim a little bit because you want to move up towards where those valves are behind you. And, without going into the details of how to actually touch your valves, I mean, there's other sources for that. For example, the material we have. But, you explain to them that the reason why has to be addressed first. Because if you get the reason why you reach your valves, then you can start to work on that reason, build it up, and then you can actually know that, wait a minute, for me to be able to touch my valves, I need to be able to do something else first. Namely, keep myself in horizontal trim position, being able to manipulate that bubble of gas in your dry suit, and voila, I do that via a modified frog kick, because then I can manipulate my body horizontally in the water and keep my equipment where it is on my back. That way, I can then focus on reaching back with my hand and touch my valves. Now, there's other examples like this as well. It's like, okay, if I need to do a back kick, people focus a lot on pulling the heels to their torso. And they're engaging all different muscles that they're used to use when they want to get their feet closer to their buttocks, right? And if we stand upside, and that's what I usually do when I stand up beside the car in the parking lot, and I said, okay, bring your feet to your buttocks. Everyone just lifts their leg up like we do when we walk or run or jump. And exactly that is what you're not supposed to do when you do a back kick.
Right.
But it's that initial neurological pathway that needs to be built from your in this case, your head down to your feet, to move in a different way. And that's the trick, I think. So when we then come back to the topic, designing that into course materials, it has to be in such a way that the student can read it or listen himself, or visually see on a video themselves doing these things. And it has to be at the same time in a way that the instructor can use the materials to put their own thoughts and their own experience to emphasize and enhance the materials in such a way that the student learns something that they cannot get out of just the course materials.
Yeah.
So that's the challenging part of
and I think what you're describing, like a big bucket of that, is this ability to put yourself into the student's shoes, even though you're well beyond that. So it's this empathy piece of, can I walk back in the shoes of when I was learning this? To apply some of that. And I always use, to drive home your point about, what people say versus what they do or what they really need. I always talk about coffee when you talk about empathy and you talk about observation. You go to a coffee shop and you run a survey and you ask everybody, you want bold, strong coffee or mild coffee or weak, watery coffee? Everybody's going to say, well, most people say, at least statistically, I want bold, strong coffee.
Yeah.
Right. And then you go, okay, great. So I'm going to give you your bold, strong coffee. That's what you need. That's what you said you need, what you want. And then if you just spend 5 minutes in a Starbucks and watch people who order that bold, strong coffee, what's the next thing they go do? They walk over to the counter and they pour some cream in or some milk, and they pop a bunch of creamy or sugars, and they dump it in, they stir it up, and they hold it up to their mouth and go, that's it. And you go, well, what do they really want? They wanted milky, sugary, sweet coffee. That's what they really want, because that's what they did, right? That's the difference. And so if you're not able to put yourself back in that as a training designer, as a content designer, education designer, in the shoes of the customer that's saying, I want bold coffee, and what they really are saying is they want sugary sweet coffee. The gap between how we get from A to B is that design, is exactly what you're talking about, is those
Yeah.
breadcrumbs of, okay, I already know this. And it's easy for someone like you who's very experienced to just say, do it this way, right? And
Mm.
this is what you should do. And that leaves out that middle ground of the student having the epiphany, the student coming to their own conclusion of, oh, this is what it should do. And I think that's the magic of good design when it comes to education, is that the student arrives at the conclusion that the instructor or that the designer of that education was intending them to arrive to on their own, that we were able to lead them down that path.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's a hard, needle to thread. And I think one of the keys here, and I want to talk about too the train the trainer side, because that's a whole different discussion. But
Yeah.
one of the keys here is, I think, understanding what is my level or my ability to practice that empathy, to practice that ability to put myself in their shoes, to remember what it was like. And sometimes it's too far, right? Sometimes it's too far away, to go back to your open water class. And you say, okay, well, maybe I can go observe some open water classes and understand what they're trying to do and what they're really, doing, rather than what they say in their review of the class, or those sorts of things. But empathy is really the first foundation, I think, to any good design, but especially when it comes to adult education, is, can I put myself in their shoes? And if I can't, then there's no way I can help them get to the outcome that I want them to get to, with the level of quality that I want them to do. And I think that's a really important point that you're kind of drawing together and bucketing it into the empathy bucket here.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it is so important for instructors and educators, or dive masters for that matter, to join other classes. I do that myself. I work together with the instructors we have here in Denmark. It's like, hey, can I join you? And let them do their thing, and I'll just watch. And it's so nice because and some of these guys I trained myself. So it would be very easy to jump to the conclusion, but what can you learn from that? Well,
Mm-hmm.
tons. During IDCs, we always say when the student learns 10 things, the instructor learns 100.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true, because you're always evolving as a person, but also as an educator. And you have to be in that open mindset. It's like, hey, finding ways to get the point across, because everyone learns in a different way. And that's the hard thing of having online educational materials. If they were used without an instructor that can modulate and emphasize on certain points, than having not an instructor there, or everything is just online based. And I think skipping the theory part and just checking if the student passed a course online is too fast, because they might have lost some nuances. And the way we've designed our education and continually design our programs is they all feed back into each other, because and that, that's also tricky, right? Because we work from this holistic approach to scuba diving. We have a certain core principle founded in the DIR philosophy, which is a mindset about standardization, if anything else. And it has to be that people can dive underwater or explore underwater using different platforms, but there has to be a common thread through those platforms. There has to be a common thread in the procedures they use whenever a certain platform makes more sense, right? There still has to be a similarity, because that way all the training complements each other. I remember when we talked with the other students when I was over, about cave versus tech class, like what should come first? Should you first become a technical diver, so you know about the valves, you know about the gases and all that sort of stuff, and then go cave diving? Or can you take your cave class and then later go tech diving? Now, if I speak for our way of teaching, both cave and tech, it doesn't matter. You can go either way. Because if you go down the cave path first and then the tech path later, you'll become a better cave diver because of the tech training after the cave class. If you go the tech path first and then cave afterwards, you'll become a better tech diver after a cave class, because they complement each other on such a level that is almost unprecedented, because all our education is just built upon the previous level, so to speak. It's never one step back to go two steps forward, because that would just be a waste of time and money.
For everybody.
Yeah,
for everybody involved.
For
Yeah,
everybody
exactly.
involved, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, the other thing that you bring up here is, how do we also think about the person that's going to utilize this as a tool, not necessarily consume it as an education.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, there's nothing harder for me than sitting in the front row of a training I designed, watching somebody else train it, and staying and learning to shut up. That was a really hard skill for me to learn, like, hey, you need to be quiet and let other people teach it the way they're going to teach it.
Yeah.
And, and let them be them. And even though you would have said it this way, or you like this story here, or whatever it would be, you have your own way. That's not the only way. So it has to be big enough. And that was a big learning for me. It has to be big enough that there's room for other people to then take that, make it their own, and then pass it to a student. And I think, some of what you're describing in that, building block mentality of saying, hey, everything's going to build on something else, is also true when it comes to how you train the trainers, right? How you train the instructors in scuba to then take these educational materials, which are designed in such a way, and then be able to apply them to a diver who's trying to take a course to accomplish X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes in the training that's a step that gets missed, in the sense that I know I've designed amazing trainings that when I teach it, it's amazing. And then somebody else gets a hold of it and trains it, and it's not as impactful. And you go, oh, well, the temptation to say, oh, well, my ego, like, I'm that good. And the reality is, you have to go back and say, well, no, I'm actually not that good. I'm actually bad, in the sense that I couldn't design a training that somebody else could take.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a philosophical split in the sense of, on one end, as an educator, as an instructor, I need to be able to take content, make it my own, make it amazing, apply it in the way that the student will understand it. But as if you take the step up from there, as you are, as the training director, designing the training for then me as an instructor to use, you have to design it in such a way that myself and an instructor in China, an instructor in Australia, an instructor in, Mexico can take all of that and make it their own with their own stories.
Bring across
and
the same
that's a
point.
tough one. Yeah. And yet still still solve the same problem.
Yeah.
Because ultimately UTD in this case is the certifying agency. We have to get to our standards and then say, yeah, that's a Tech 1 UTD diver or not.
Exactly. Now we have tools in place that help the instructor, obviously, on this path. I mean, for years we've had what we call a playbook, and it's more than just our instructor manual, as you get so much with so many other organizations. The instructor manual we have is the list of standards and what needs to be accomplished in certain classes, whereas our playbook is a guide to how to logistically set up certain classes and to the smallest detail, like to where does your thumb go in this drill and what does your left hand do while your right hand, I mean, to the crazy detail, which is fantastic because it really helps emphasize the parts that need to be emphasized. And all our training we do rests on the shoulders of the students and not the instructor. and not me, the instructor or the instructor trainer, or not me, the training director. It has to be centered around the student. So what that means is that we have to keep putting things in front of the student in such a way that they, when they're close to certification, get that final aha moment, that final epiphany that make things come full circle. And we do this with our theory, which we set up in such a way that it complements the linking training in the confined water, or in the initial parts of the classes, what we call the personal skills development. And later then we become divers that use that in critical skills training. And that's when things become full circle. That's when the correlation between the theory, the personal skills, and now the critical skills in which we put them to the tests gets complete, right? And to give an explanation of what that is like the theory sets you up from a theory point of view. It's like, okay, what do we need to cover? The personal skills are the most overlooked development area in scuba industry, I think. Actually learning how to move yourself underwater. And I draw this parallel a lot of the times to explain what we do differently. And in so many sports, it's so obvious, right? Take, for example, swimming or dancing or mountain biking or skiing or whatever, any sort of sports where you're physically active has a strong motory skill development part of it. I can teach you the steps of a cha-cha-cha. I can write them down, what your left leg should do, what your right leg should do, what your hip should do, what your arm should do, how you should look at your partner, all that sort of. I could write that down, and it is written down. And these dancing books are super complex to read. And if I sound like I know what I'm talking about, yeah, I took dancing lessons. So, but it's so funny because I bought one of these books because I mean, not because I was, going down the path of buying too high waist tight, trousers and get my hair black and all the way back. But
I want to see you in your flamenco uniform.
Exactly. I don't have one. I'm sorry. But I was interested in how they would describe how to move your body in such a way that it expresses a dance, because dance is about expressing emotion through movement, right? And of course, we're not going down that path that far. We're not expressing emotions with our back kick. I mean, it's not that dramatic.
Sometimes, like, what did you just do that for, right?
That's
emotion under the water.
That's true.
But it's not because I put my back kick this way or that way. It's usually because my middle fingers are up. Right?
Exactly. It's a different movement. Yeah. No, but it was interesting to read how they would describe the movement of the body. And I think in many ways, like I said earlier, it's about getting the diver to reach a conclusion in their own minds, like, hey, I need to send these and these signals to my butt in order for me to move my legs in such a way. And that requires a little bit of knowledge of you and your anatomy, what works together, what muscle groups are antagonists of other muscle groups, and so on and so forth. And I think that helps, or at least it helps me a lot, in getting the point across with moving divers underwater. And it works from the very beginning, from the open water class, from entry-level classes, right? When we teach them the very basics of scuba diving, which is breathing. And how does your body react to being underwater? And as you know, all of the initial classes are without scuba equipment. It's no equipment. It's bathing suit or swimming trunks, and that is it. Nothing else. Let's first see what your body does underwater, and let's get your land brain, park it, and let's get a water brain. That's the first thing we need to do. And when that's done, let's now slowly introduce some of the equipment that can now do what your body wants to do underwater, but help you. Let's give you some tools to make your job easier, right? And that's what it's all about. And then um, that's when we can get into um, the fact that you, as a diver, should be less focused on the equipment and more focused on you as the biggest piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And the other stuff is just tools that make it either more or less efficient. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really, really important point, is that at the end of the day, the real problem to solve, there is some manipulation of equipment, right? There is some theoretical underpinning that has to be, present. But you're kind of, hitting on the point that the key here is the mindset, is the correlation, is the, metabolizing of that theory and that gear into me as the student. I remember, and I think, just to finish that line of thought, the idea of then the experience of that individual, of that student, is then what drives it home when they have that aha moment, when they put all those things together. The story I was going to tell was, I remember one of the key things that I've designed for a lot is the ability to run experiments. In other words, market experiments, to test risky assumptions in your business plan, business model, right? So a risky assumption could be something like the customer will log on, right? Something like that.
Mm.
Well, in this particular case, I was working in a hospital setting, and the problem they were trying to solve as a team was, these transmuted diseases that move from hospital bed to hospital bed, patient to patient, on the hands of the healthcare providers, which is a kind of gross thing to think about, but it's a big, big problem to solve in a hospital, and especially in a, I think they had like 30 hospitals, a chain of hospitals. If you can affect that, you can have a huge effect. So, long story short, one of the main ways that they do that is to ensure that healthcare providers can wash their hands, right, in between those visits. And unfortunately, the enforcement mechanism for that was a clipboard. They literally hired somebody at every hospital at the stations to watch and make sure doctors and healthcare providers were washing their hands. The other challenge is that, well, how do you know when your hands are clean?
Mm.
So, I mean, if you wash your hands with soap that says kills 99.9% of bacteria, well, how do you know that's true? Do you measure it under a germoscope, and then you go, okay, yep, and now I'm washing my hands, and now I measure again. Oh, yeah, nothing's there. We really don't know. It's a feel thing, right? We did the action. We really don't know if it worked or it didn't. As we all learned in COVID, right? Especially singing "Happy
Exactly.
Birthday" to ourselves 1,000 times. But the solution this team came up with was essentially you stick your hands into something, and it's an ultrasonic cleaner, and you take your hands out, and it gives you the green light that it's clean, it's guaranteed, it's tracking these doctors and healthcare providers, so on and so forth. Cool solution. So I remember so clearly, okay, let's design the experiment. And the riskiest assumption was, hey, will doctors with PhDs, right, stick their hands in a device and think that it cleaned their hands, or is washing the hands too tactile? It's something that we have to feel, right? How will this work? And I remember so clearly, okay, the key here is not whether or not the healthcare providers do that, whether or not what I was after as an instructor, as an educator, was, can I get them out of the building to learn to observe people?
Mm.
Because the action before that was, well, let's go build it. Let's build it. Let's spend millions of dollars and implement it. And we actually never got the feedback. We never got evidence that says that this is worth building. This is worth the investment. So let's test it at its easiest form. So they took a cardboard box, they cut some holes in it, painted it up, made it look nice, blah, blah, blah. And we said, okay, great. We have this experiment design. Let's get out of the building and see if, the first risky assumption, will doctors put their hands in this thing or not? And I remember so clearly the leader of the team, as they were going, getting ready to go out of the building, is holding this box. And she goes, Jeremiah, I go by Jeremiah in the business world. She goes, are you serious? Like, you're going to send us out of this room with this box? So, hey, I'm not sending you anywhere. Like, this is your choice. If you guys don't want to go, that's totally fine. But what's the worst that could happen in your mind? Well, they're going to laugh at us. Oh, yeah, maybe. Okay. But how else are we going to learn this? whether they'll do this. I mean, if we ask them, that's not really seeing what they'll do. It's just they'll tell us something. But would you believe it? Well, no. So, well, this is kind of the only way to do it then, right? And I remember just this like look, and this is an adult, who's very successful in her career, and her team that she's leading out the door as they left, just like, I cannot believe that you're making us do this, was the feeling, right? And I remember waiting on pins and needles for them to come back, half the day later to see how it went. And I remember just watching them come into the room, all smiles, totally different body demeanor, totally different, action, full of, conversation about what happened and what it means and all this stuff. And they had learned a ton. And all of a sudden it was just this wealth of what they didn't expect to happen, what they did. And to me, as an educator, I sat back and said, like, amazing. The point is driven here, that, yeah, with a little cardboard box and some holes in it, we can go out in half a day and learn more than we could have in, months worth of focus groups that you guys wanted to do. And so I think that's one of the keys in designing the training is to present the opportunities for then the students to experience what you're talking about, experience the gear, experience the theory, experience whatever it is, and apply it in their own way. And granted, that experiment was choppy. It was, they could have probably done it in 1,000 different ways that would have been better. But the point wasn't to have a great experiment and to get great learnings. The point was to teach the team, and especially that leader, to get outside the building to learn.
Yeah.
And that's the larger point, right? And I think that's kind of what you're hitting at, is how do we get to that point in the design, though, from a philosophical standpoint, of the student experiencing it. You can't manufacture current. You can't manufacture, well, I guess you can manufacture gear failures because you've done it to me tons, but
A lot,
you can't do those, right? But how do you apply it in the most real setting is a really big challenge from an education standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to make a note of that because I want to get back to that real setting, because that's a very important point you're making. And I think you said something interesting there. You said the assumption of the result is as expected, right? Okay, you go and do something, and you do it because of a need. And when you've done that certain thing, if there's no way of measuring what the outcome is, like washing your hands, you expect the result is as expected. You think, okay, I've washed my hands are there now for clean. But you don't know. Like you said, you haven't tested it. It might still be germs underneath your nails, or you didn't wash your left pinky properly, or whatever. There might still be a booger there.
That damn left pinky.
Yeah, you never know. So, and I think when we draw a parallel to scuba, and to the first point I made in the beginning, is like, okay, if people are having a pragmatic point of view to a certain certification level, that's fine, that's measurable, that's doable, right? I can test that, I can put things into play that can actually verify that from from checking your hands if they're actually dirty still or not. But from a more deeper context than washing your hands within scuba, it's a tricky part, because when you take a class, and you mentioned technical training before, when you take that class and you're finished with that class and you got your card and you got the pragmatic part of that card, so now you can go and get your gases filled and all that stuff, you also assume that you know to dive these dives or do these dives, and assume that you can handle the risks that they entail. But that's a big assumption, and that's much harder to test, because, hey, it's a bit more consequence to it than washing your hands. Oh, they're still dirty. Oh, let me wash them again. Then doing a dive. Shit, there's a problem. I cannot solve this problem. Oh, I cannot try again. That's the thing in scuba. We rarely get do-overs, because that's the nature of the elements we're in, right? We're under the mercy of nature, and we need to have an exit plan regardless of what the problems are. So this is where, when we come back to the early points of getting someone to realize that what they're actually seeking is a safe way to conduct the dives that they're willing to do, is sometimes a tough sell, is sometimes a hard sell. And I think this is why we as UTD are a little bit of a boutique agency, because it takes a certain amount of diver with a certain amount of um, willpower to put themselves in a position where they're going to be um, tested in such a way that is very confronting, you know, but on the other hand, very, very giving as well. One of the most popular programs we teach is called our essentials programs, right? I mean, it's the essentials of recreational diving, or essentials of technical diving, or essentials of CCR, or essentials of side mount. And all these essentials classes are not teaching divers to go deeper. They're not teaching them to dive with different gases. They don't do anything for them from a pragmatic point of view. They only give them selfish personal skills. It's a pure skill development class, personal skill development class. And that's always, when I teach those classes, I always start off with thanking them for trusting me, or trusting us as an agency, to take the time to invest in yourself, and trusting us to help you develop yourself personally, because they're spending the same amount of money and time that it would if they would take a class that does give them, new limits, let's call it that, be it depth or time or gas or whatever. So I think that's the great part of ours as an agency. We have such a flat organizational structure that we are so in touch with our instructors that we constantly talk back and forth about how this works and how we can do that. And we talk about that also a lot in our IDCs, that it's important to bring across that you pay for training and you earn your certification. And it's not that, hey, I want my so-and-so card. Well, what does that mean for you, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
So first dial down the the acceptance of the fact that, okay, you want to learn to dive in a certain area or environment. Let's talk about that. What does that mean, right? And that's when I liked when you said, let's put things in a real setting. Let's get these people out of this building, and let make them do something physical to test their reactions. Not to just have them write down on a piece of paper what they would do or what they would ideally do. No, let's see if actually what they really want is that black coffee without anything added. Let's
Right.
see. Let's see if that's what they're going for. And that's what we're doing with our critical skills, right? When we develop critical skills training, when I write those things down, and when I think about the order of these skills, they're not just a bucket of mayhem we drag with us as instructors underwater and just dump it over the people and see how they can cope. It's not boot camp in the
Right.
military. Um, Even they've gone away from that type of training, and they had months to build people up afterwards. We usually have a long weekend. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are any instructors out there that still go by that, let's give them stress tests and breakdown dives and all that sort of stuff, I would really urge you to start looking at a bit more of a proactive and a building block fashion of training these things, because you hear a lot in education that you learn from your mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest load of BS there is. No one
Hmm.
learns from their mistakes. You make a mistake, oh, I made a mistake. No. You only learn from your mistakes if you get a chance to do it over and do it
Mm-hmm.
in a different way. Right? Einstein quoted that it's the definition of stupidity, right? To do the same thing over and over and expect a different outcome.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you only stop at the saying, "Hey, you learn from your mistakes," no, you don't. You have to do that over again and test yourself and choose another solve um, uh, solution and see if that works. And that's what we're doing with these critical skills. Usually, now you've experienced this firsthand. Usually, the failures the divers make are just emphasized by the instructor to drive
Right.
a point home, right? If someone in the team descends before the rest of the team, the instructor might swim down to that team and say, stay on the surface, and then swim down to that solo diver now on the bottom and say, hey, you have a problem. Solve
Yeah.
it, but you're alone. Oh, shit, yeah. And then on the video, we'll see, okay, that's why you don't do that. Or if some diver constantly turns around and almost kicks other divers in the face with their mask, we might take a mask of that diver. Now, that's not to test the diver, how good they are in replacing a mask. No, it's to teach the diver that just kicked the mask off the face of his team to not move in such a way to kick the face of another teammate. And it's these things that we want to build in so that they can come out of the water as a cohesive team and not just, two or three divers just happen to swim next to each other, and then we stop in the middle of a swimming, and then the instructor swims out in front and says, hey, you do a valve drill. Great. We swim on, and then, hey, you pretend that your necklace is free flowing. Okay, great. Continue. And then, you pretend that your SPG is bubbling. That's not training. That's just monkey see, monkey do. That's just, okay, do this. Okay, do this. Okay. That's personal skills. That's easy stuff, right? What we want is the awareness of the team. It's like introduce certain failures that make sense underwater, failures that are so realistic that the divers almost turn into a certain form of role playing, and then they have to establish an exit strategy, and no skill gets stopped in the middle of something, because no, if you're out of gas, you don't miraculously get your gas back. Right? I mean, you have to follow through the consequences, the complete consequences, and not just say, because everyone, like you said, if you would ask those doctors, what would you do in such and such a situation? They would write down the perfect answer. But let's go, not ask them. Let's go and test it. Let's put it out in front of them and see how they would react. That's the most powerful teaching tool you have, to test people in the environment how to handle certain failures. And yeah, we do that with all sorts of development tools, right? Air guns, certain failures we put into place, certain ways of placing divers in certain situations to elicit a reaction from the team. And none of these skills, not one single skill or drill or failure, is only to test one diver. It is always a team thing. It's always, how does the whole team react to this failure? And that's what sometimes drives me up the wall when you hear these training, or you hear these near misses, or you hear these divers that are planning dives, and the whole talking about the solo aspect comes into play. And when we dive this in this configuration, it's better off to just be your own self. And oh my God, no, it is not safe.
Right.
It is not the way to do it. We have done a video on this on our YouTube channel, on the UTD YouTube channel, about redundancy. Many people get redundancy wrong. They think redundancy has to do with the fact that you have to solve your own problems. No, nothing of the sort. Redundancy is just to hinder your team less in them helping you solve your problem, not that you can do it on your own. That's not what we're saying with redundancy. But yeah, that's a talk for another podcast. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you hit on an important point in the sense that if you start with that empathy from a design perspective, right, and you say, okay, well, let me put myself in that in the student's shoes, and then also at the same time in the instructor's shoes, that they can use this.
Yeah.
And then you talk about, okay, how do we lay this out from a design standpoint over time? I mean, if you jumped in the water, for example, with some of the critical skills that you're describing, and you just start grabbing mass from an open water student on their second dive,
yeah,
I mean, it's pointless, right? From a design standpoint, you're actually not building that diver up anymore. Now they might go, oh, we're going to make them have a bunch of mistakes so that they've experienced everything they could ever experience under the water in open water dive 3.
Yeah.
Right? But you have to think through in the design of it, how do we start with what's the foundation that they need to rely on? So if you come up and, for example, steal the diaphragm out of my Deco bottle,
Yeah.
right? If I don't have the ability in the first place to make a stop to even get to that Deco bottle,
Mm.
it's pointless. If I can't hold myself at 20 feet, well, the diaphragm thing's kind of a pointless exercise, other than, oh, he got surprised.
Yeah.
And so I think looking at a design standpoint from, not only the empathy, but then saying, okay, what is the progression of things that need to happen, and how do I lay that out in a way that then they have experiences of that progression? And I think if you look at that from a training philosophy or training design philosophy, the heart of it being empathy, the next piece being, the progression, and the last piece being, okay, here's how we experience or create opportunities for our students and our instructors, by the way, to experience what we're talking about here.
Mm.
That's the magic. When all those things come together in their own way, then there's the magic. I think where it starts to break down is exactly the expectation. Oh, okay, I'm going to a Tech 1 class because I'm going to learn, how to dive to 150 feet, and I don't have a back kick yet.
Yeah.
And the class becomes all about the back kick. And you go, well, that's the progression breaking down.
Exactly.
Or if you come to a class and you say, okay, hey, I want to, learn how to do, team ascent. And you describe it and you make them write down all the scenarios and you show them a video of teams ascending. You say, you get it? And they go, yeah, okay, great. Now you've learned team ascent. That's the experience part of it breaking down.
Mm.
Right. And then if you go to the back the spot of it and you say, okay, hey, in order to take this Tech 1 class, it's going to be, 3 days in the classroom of me talking and 100-page or 100-question quiz. And if you get one wrong,
You
you're out.
failed. Yeah.
That's the empathy part, right? This is impossible. Well, I'm not ready for that. Or one, that's a terrible experience. But two, that empathetic spot, I'm not ready to step into that yet. Right. I'm just testing out the water. So I think you have 3 points of failure that in good design of education, especially for adults, if the empathy is not there, if the progression or the thought through the progression is not there, and then the opportunity to experience that in some way is not there, either any of those can break down to then not produce the result that was, intended from that course. So it's super interesting from a philosophy standpoint.
Exactly. And this is also why it's sometimes so hard to really put to explain to people how long it sometimes takes to write a certain program, because it's not just as simple as just putting a bunch of facts on some sheets and letting it go out there. They all have to tie in to the philosophy. They all have to tie into the theory, from the theory to the personal skills class, and then going on to maybe the next level, or how are they coming into this class from what background, right? So that makes it challenging. So when I set out to design a certain class, like for example, right now I'm rewriting the new Scooter Cave program. And it was some instructors are out there and they're saying, hey, just put it out there, we're waiting. Yeah, but it's not that simple, right? It sounds
Right.
like a very simple thing to do, but it's a tricky one to put into play, because hey, it has to work from all levels. It has to be okay overhead for a simple recently cave 2 diver, but also someone who might have a ton of experience cave diving and might even already be on rebreathers with this scooter. How do I work this in to the course materials so that we're teaching them both something, but not boring one and over-educating the other, and
Right.
leaving the door open for both of them to go the other way, right? And that's the interesting part. I mean, that's the challenging part from a design point of view. It's like, how do we keep this in such a way that it's timeless, but applicable to a multitude of levels. That's the interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're out there listening to this right now and you've taken courses, but maybe you haven't been involved in some way of developing, learning or whatever it might be for other people, you may not realize just how much thought and energy and intention and debate and so on and trial and error, I would add, go into designing education. It doesn't stop when we get out of high school or college and okay, my education's done. There are constant places where you're being educated, whether it's in my compliance training, which was terrible, lack of empathy, lack of progression, and lack of actual application or experience. But excuse me, but the people that are behind that training in your scuba, and I think I can tout UTD's horn here quite a bit, in the sense that I've experienced it as a student, to think, okay, what is the customer experience of this? And striking that right balance of those three things and getting it right for me versus my teammate, that's a hard thing.
Yeah.
And for me, for the most part, what's interesting is sometimes in my coaching program, I was always told, okay, go back and do this again. And I go, well, why? Like, I already did that. And I go do it. And I go, oh, wow. Did I ever actually do this? And that's because I have a new lens. I had new information I didn't have before. And it's, and that's the beauty of the content in some ways, is that, oh, wow, I've seen this 5 times, but every time I feel like I haven't seen it before, because the things that are being referenced or the things that I weren't there before are now there. And so I think it's a hard, needle to thread. And one of the things that I appreciate about you, Ben, in that role, is that I think there's you demonstrate constantly a willingness to keep learning and keep pushing it forward. And I'll bring things to you sometimes and say, hey, this didn't make any sense to me in this course. And you'll say, oh yeah, that makes sense. We need to evolve it this way forward. Or hey, I saw this in another way, that other training agency or another, outside of Scuba, the dance company that the troupe that you tour with on the winters, right?
Yeah.
The Dutch troubadours.
That's them.
Flag dancers.
Oh yeah.
Remember those guys you tour with, when you're not doing scuba, they're teaching it this way, how to move a body. So maybe we can try it this way and set our instructors up. And I think that's important. I think that's maybe the final piece of all this, empathy, progression, experience, and then continual improvement is probably the last piece, is that if it sits the way it sat when you designed it on day one, then it actually hasn't created room to evolve and grow and get better and better and better over time.
Yeah.
That's the other tricky part of the design, is how do I create room for it to get better and not stagnate? How do I let it live and grow?
Well, exactly. I mean, because all I am at the end of the day is an instructor, right? And that's it. Just like you said, I put a lot of experience and seeing how things work and not work puts me in a position to create these courses with a lot of empathy, because I've seen it a lot, and that's what I use as a way to give the instructors a shortcut, a quickest way to get the point across, so to speak. But in order for anyone that's teaching anything in a correct way, in a passionate way, in a meaningful way, and a way where the instructor is present at the time of teaching, you have to be the everlasting student yourself, right? You have to constantly be that inquisitive person in all walks of life to get the most out of the thing that you put yourself into, and to really absorb stuff and be present in what you're doing, because that way you learn how to get points across. And like I said, I come from a sales background, and for me, everything is sales. Teaching is sales. I'm selling you knowledge. I'm selling you a way of doing things. And if you look at it from that point of view, we cannot we can never have bad students. And we talked about this when you were helping me out with the IDC last time I was over, and we talked with the IDC candidates about this. It's like, okay, there's no such thing as a bad student, because if you think about it from a sales point of view and see, okay, the customer is always king, right? Okay, great. Then the student's always king, because the student is your customer. The student is buying your knowledge. The student is buying your teachings. And if they're doing something that you didn't expect them to do, it's not their fault. You should have explained it better, in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
If a student comes up to your class is unprepared, it's not a bad student. It's a bad instructor. You didn't emphasize strongly enough that they should be prepared. Right? So, and if that still doesn't work, if you then send 4 emails, 3 letters, send a post of, and write a letter to their mom, having them explain that they should be prepared, and they still don't come prepared, then it's still your fault. Then you should just make the course so that you don't have to prepare. If it's that hard for the students to prepare, don't make them prepare. Constantly point the finger at yourself. That's the only way you will evolve. And I think that's the only way to truly stay passionate about teaching. You hear so often with instructors in the scuba industry that eventually they only want to teach tech classes. They're done with the open water classes. Or tri dives. Nah, I don't want to do tri dives anymore. That's not me. I want to teach tech cave rebreather classes on a scooter, That's what I want to do. No. That's the diving you want to do. Maybe you shouldn't be an instructor. Maybe the instructor part is your ego wanting you to be an instructor. Sounds cool, right? For me, personally, the teaching of scuba is a completely different animal than the doing of scuba. I happen to like both. I do a lot of tri dives, a lot, and refreshers. I mean, I'm going in the water on Sunday with a refresher. I went in the water last weekend with a girl who just was a very inexperienced, like 12 dive old diver that I've never met before, and she wanted some experience dive. So no course, no nothing, just a dive where we just talk about what she's doing, how she's doing it, and maybe some pointers here and there. Very low key, nothing really structured. And I love that stuff. I love to see the passion of those young developing divers. And where my lead, and I'll give my 5 cents on or 2 cents on that, and that has nothing to do with the dive. That was just purely for me from an empathic fulfillment. For me, I got joy out of that. I mean, from that point of view, that I could see, okay, great, the things that she gained from that in self-confidence of doing that dive, because her parent that wanted me to give her some experience in the diving. Said, okay, great, I can do that by planning the dive, setting up the dive for her, putting her equipment together, make her swim behind me, and we come out of the water together. And every 5 fin kicks, I'll turn around and look if she's still there, and there'll probably be saucer big eyes looking only at me, and she'll follow me around. Perfect, great. Is that an experience dive? No, that's a survival dive. It's just following these, put a bell around their neck and walking around like a goat in a field. There's nothing there.
I literally saw this the other day, which from, I won't name names, but from a shop that I know of, that the visibility got so bad in the lake that they had come up with a Home Depot version of basically a carabiner clip on the end of 2 sides of a bungee to keep the team together. So they literally have a long bungee that they're clipping to each other.
Yeah.
And you go, it's the same thing, right? Might as well just clip the bungee on and make sure the carabiner clip's still there.
Oh my goodness.
And follow along, right? I know.
I've done a whole rant on a buddy line once, and when I sit back in my garden with a glass of wine. It's probably on the YouTube channel, probably maybe on an old Now Dive YouTube channel from way back when. And I just went off a rant on a buddy line thing that it's just no one want to dive on a diving leash. You're not walking your dog.
Exactly.
Come on.
walking the dog.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted your story, but you brought that up. That of course, you could have done that as well. Leashed her to you, and that would have guaranteed the safety.
Well, we guaranteed that she would stay with me, and would have given her even less self-confidence. So I approached it from the other way. It's like, hey, what do you want to do? This is a lake. You've never been here before. I've been here tons. Where do you want to go? I can, how you say, suggest certain areas. Like there's usually pike over there, and lo and behold, we found a big pike. But that's great when something like that happened. I promised her a pike, and this huge pike swam by, and I'm like, yes, on her behalf. I can't remember how many pikes I've seen in my life, but she was like all over the place. Right? So, and then went to a place where there's these, I don't know what you call them in English, these beautiful leaves that float on the surface. A lotus flower, maybe?
Oh, okay, yeah, lotus, yeah.
The stick comes from the bottom and it goes all the way to the surface, and it's this big round...
Oh, lily pad, yeah.
Lily pad, that's
lily
it, lily
pad,
pads.
yeah.
A beautiful area of lily pads, and if you swim underneath it and the sun is just right, it's fantastic, right? I mean, we're at 6 feet of water, but beautiful. So I said, go from here to there. And I said, how much do you know about compass navigation? And then she's like every other diver and did no clue about compass navigation in general. Generalizing a little bit, but so made a quick little workshop on the compass heading, and I said, but forget the compass a little bit because it's a slopey bottom. So keep the slopey bottom on the left on this way, and then on the right on that way, and we should end up at the same spot. And I said, I'll just follow you around. You do you. We'll just swim around. And I explained her some hand signals if she gets confused, whatever. And then we had a great dive. And she kind of swam. We swam on par, right? I didn't want to. In UTD, we have a slang thing which is called a trust me dives. We don't like trust me dives. And if I would have just taken the control 100%, dragged her along, even on a buddy line or something like bullshit like that, it would be a 100% trust me dive. She would have no clue where she was underwater. She would just be breathing underwater and moving forwards. That's it. That's the whole, amount of education she would have got from that dive. And the whole point of the dive was to give her some experience. Now, an experience is something else than routine. If I should just make her swim underwater, she just gets a little bit more routine in swimming underwater. There's no learning. There's no experience to be had there. So we had a great 45 minutes underwater, saw 2 big pikes, the lily pads. Fantastic.
Yeah. And I think we'll wrap this one up here, but that point about trust me dives, the inverse, or not necessarily the inverse of that, but what you're really saying in a trust me is don't trust yourself. And that's the big difference. And if you're trying to build people up to be competent in whether it be this 12 dive, lady that you went out with who's just trying to build some confidence in general around diving, or it be a Tech 3 diver learning, how to manage, this crazy gas on the surface versus at depth. If you just say, well, do it the way I do it, or, follow me, trust me, and you don't create those opportunities for them to experience it, to apply it, then it's also saying at the end of it, when this is all done, you don't trust yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the conclusion.
Yep.
You need to come with me if you want to do these dives again, because I'll handle all the stuff that you can't do.
Exactly.
And I think that's the wrong approach, right?
100%. You have to show them the value. And that's another big part of the whole design of this, of designing scuba or teaching scuba is to letting them see the value of a certain protocol or a certain skill. Because if the value isn't there, you're not willing to buy it. And if you're not buying it, you're not using it. And if you're not using it, you don't know what you're not using. And then you go down that path of people think they're very safe, but they're unaware of the things they're unaware of. And you go down that path of, hey, damn, now I'm in a pickle.
I wish I had, right? That's the name of it. I think one of the documentaries. I wish,
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, great, Ben. This has been awesome. I feel like, as always, we could just talk for another 3 hours on this topic. Maybe we should come back and keep on going, because I think it's really interesting. Hopefully for you out there listening to this, it gives you a behind the scenes view of the thought and intention, philosophy, all of that goes into a course that you might be taking this weekend, or a course you have planned for next month or over the winter. In the sense that I think, I'll always toot the UTD horn, in the sense that I think that it's amazing, the way that this is designed and the way that it's executed. But I also know there are other agencies who put a lot of emphasis and thought, and a lot of instructors that put that same emphasis and thought in the way that they're approaching it. So give one of those people a high five. And now that you've seen a little bit of behind the scenes, the challenges and approaches to designing scuba training. And if you want to experience this firsthand, come find your UTD instructor. Come train with Ben. Ben will be out there. You're coming to DEMA, right, this year?
Yeah. I have a whole program. I'm all over the States, basically. East Coast, West Coast, middle, and then back home.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So reach out to Ben at utdscubadiving, right? .com.
Exactly.
Yep. Ben at utdscubadiving.com. Reach out to Ben. Maybe there's an opportunity to meet up with him, over the course of the next few months, and learn from him directly. But Ben, as always, thank you for spending the time.
Thank you, Jay.
And look forward to our third episode together. I think we're going to get into some gear, which will be
that'll be fun. It'd be fun. Who doesn't love gear? Scuba gear.
Of course. Yeah, I have a fun question to ask you on that one. But we'll get there. Stay tuned out there if you're listening for the next episode with Ben. And if you have not already, make sure that you've subscribed so that you get notified when new episodes drop. And you can also go to thedivetable.com and leave a message, an actual message, like a voicemail on the website if you want to. It's a new feature that came out. And who knows, it might just get played on air at some point. We'd love to hear from you.
Perfect.
And you can always reach me at j@thedivetable.com. Thanks for listening, and I hope you come back to listen to the next episode of The Dive Table.